Moscow, 1936. Inside the Kremlin reigns one of history's bloodiest dictators. Stalin. His power is absolute. He announces the results of the 1936 elections. 98.6% of the ballots. He's merciless, asking his people to sacrifice their blood. His subjects live in fear. Like in a ritual, they're forced to shower the tyrant with endless rounds of applause. Stalin feigns impatience. He pulls out his watch. In the audience, Vasily Petrovich Nikolaev recalls. The comrades look around at each other. No one wants to be the first to stop applauding. I don't know why, but I sit back down. 2 days later, he is arrested, thrown in jail, beaten, and tortured. But his faith in communism never wavers. Why? Stalin and his accomplices have fabricated a planetary lie, built on the foundations of his past and his crimes. To this day, the lie continues to poison many minds. Behind this lie lurks the apocalypse. Who is Stalin? A safeguard against Nazism? The little father of the peoples? A mass murderer? Stalin once said, "Death solves all problems. No man, no problem." How did he succeed in extending his power across half the planet? Through colorized archive footage, discover the rise to power of the young seminarian who, just like a character in classic Russian literature, becomes a demon. June 22nd, 1941. Without a prior declaration of war, the German Air Force attacks Russia, known at the time as the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The German advance is devastating. Within days, Germany captures hundreds of thousands of prisoners. Hitler, the ruler of Nazi Germany, is clearly reaffirming his war objectives. He wants to get rid of his worst enemy, communism, and its leader, Stalin, and conquer what he refers to as Germany's living space. Hitler declares, "Our destiny points us to the east. We will put an end to Russia." Since September 1939, Hitler and his fanatic army have invaded Poland, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Yugoslavia, and Greece. They are now advancing on Leningrad, Kiev, and Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union. Early on the morning of June 22nd, 1941, Stalin finally wakes up. No one has had the courage to warn him. Stalin has done everything possible to avoid war, even going so far as to provide Germany with the fuel and rare metals that have helped Hitler defeat France. May 1st, 1941, in Red Square. Just a few weeks before Hitler's attack, Soviet propaganda insisted that German guests attend the traditional military parade. In order to delay the timetable and be the first to attack, Stalin shocked the world by signing a Germano-Soviet non-aggression pact with Hitler. The agreement included secret clauses giving Germany power over half of Poland and the Baltic countries. On August 23, 1939, the day the treaty was signed with Germany, Hitler's photographer had been sent to Moscow with orders to take close-ups of Stalin's ears. According to Hitler, the Jews have deformed earlobes. Stalin's earlobes were normal, so he couldn't be Jewish. Stalin is not Jewish, or even Russian, in fact. He is Georgian. His mother tongue isn't Russian, it's Georgian. Although he was raised in the Russian Orthodox Church, his mindset is closer to that of a Middle Eastern despot. 1892, the earliest known photograph of Stalin, a choir boy of 14. Stalin is born on December 6, 1878 in Gori, a little village a two-day walk from Tiflis, the capital of Georgia, part of the Russian Empire, the world's greatest at the time, with 170 million inhabitants. In St. Petersburg, a long line of Romanovs have been ruling for 3 centuries. The current emperor, or Tsar, a derivative of Caesar, is Nicholas II, a weak and devout sovereign. Stalin's Georgia is a rough country in the Caucasus, where Turkish, Armenian, Kurdish, and Jewish minorities struggle to coexist. His father, Bazarian Jugashvili, is a cobbler, fond of his red wine. Joseph looks like him. Joseph, son of Bazarian, or in Russian, Joseph Vissarionovich Jugashvili, alias Stalin, will hide the memory of his drunk, violent father. Just like he will hide his many childhood disabilities, like his webbed feet, or the diseases that killed his 2 brothers, the smallpox that left permanent scars on his skin, marks which Kremlin makeup artists will desperately try to mask. His left arm is shorter than the right, and he's had a limp ever since a cart fell on him when he was 12. But the one thing he can't hide is his heavy Georgian accent, so he rarely speaks in public. July 3rd, 1941. The chime rings out from the Kremlin, heralding Radio Moscow and signaling that Stalin is about to make a speech, which will be relayed by mandatory loudspeakers throughout the country's public squares. It has taken Stalin 10 days to admit that the Red Army is threatened by the Germans. The worried Soviet people finally hear his voice and his gravelly Caucasian accent. Serafina Panisenko, a young nurse, is in the crowd. She recalls this terrible moment. Everyone around me was crying. What struck me was that people were crossing themselves. They were praying. But we were taught at school that God doesn't exist. Stalin, the new God, persecutor of the church, was educated in a seminary. Thanks to a scholarship, he entered the seminary in 1894 at 16. His exceptional memory and his singing voice had been singled out. A seminary education was the wish of Ekaterina, his mother. Despite being a pious woman, she beat him as often as his father did. Stalin has always preferred to forget his family and hide them away. Once he's in power, he returns to his childhood home and, like any dutiful son, he visits his mother. She asks him what he does now. And Stalin replies, "Do you remember the Tsar? Well, I've become a sort of Tsar." She replies, "You would have been better off becoming a priest." His mother didn't want him to stay in their village and become a cobbler like his father had hoped. Sending him away to the seminary was her choice. She wants him to become a bishop, and Stalin, who speaks only Georgian, is about to learn Russian, Greek, and arithmetic. He is still a teenager who writes poems like this one. The lark, singing its chirping hymn, soars high above the clouds. Meanwhile, the nightingale intones with sweet, mellifluous sounds. Stalin loses his faith while he is a student at the Tiflis seminary. In this breeding ground for revolutionaries, with the help of the mean, filthy Orthodox priests and their alcoholic guard, he learns techniques of repression. Stalin lists them himself: surveillance, spying, invasion of one's inner life, violation of one's feelings. But he also learns the virtues of silence. To Stalin, there is always more to gain from listening than speaking. Never reveal your feelings. Never betray yourself. In 1898, he's 20. He is changed. He provokes the authorities. He refuses to cut his hair. He lets his beard grow out. He reads forbidden books by Zola or Victor Hugo, which speak out against social injustice. He is expelled from the seminary. He adopts his first nickname, Koba, the name of a Robin Hood of the Caucasus. He pictures himself as a gang leader. In 1901, he joins the underground Social Democrat Party in Tiflis and is immediately spotted by the Tsar's secret police, the Okhrana. He works for a few months at the Meteorological Observatory. This leaves him enough time to read the works of the German Karl Marx, who along with Friedrich Engels had written the Communist Manifesto in 1847. This text called for the end of private property and capitalism, exhorting the workers of the world to unite and join together in armed revolution. Marx decries the exploitation of man by man and the misery of the proletariat that, according to him, has nothing to lose but its chains. Stalin's naive paintings show the future dictator as a Marxist indoctrinating workers. He asks them, "Why don't we have any political rights? How can we change our existence?" He believes that the Russian Empire of the 20th century is a feudal society that must be destroyed. Some rare footage of the carefree members of the imperial family filming themselves to show their English cousins that they too know how to play tennis, and that they are brave enough to dive into the icy waters of Lake Ladoga near the palace in St. Petersburg. A new working class emerges as Russia becomes industrialized. Particularly in the Caucasus, Baku's oil wells and refineries make a few elite wealthy and incite the exploited to rise up. Their revolutionary song is La Marseillaise in Russian with different words. At 23, Joseph Zhugashvili is sent to Baku by the socialists to organize protests and forbidden strikes, confirming his calling as a leader. He is impassioned by the writings of Nechayev, a 19th century Russian revolutionary, in particular, Catechism of a Revolutionary. The revolutionary has no personal interests, feelings, not even a name. He has cut all ties with law and moral. He is a remorseless enemy of the civilized world, which he only lives in to destroy. All inner feelings of friendship, gratitude, and honor must be stifled by the single revolutionary passion. Joseph Zhugashvili, a revolutionary agitator, is arrested on April 5, 1902. His police record reads, height 1.62 meters, brown hair, average build, age 24. He will later say that Tsar's prisons are like rest homes. Indeed, the discipline and treatment of prisoners is a far cry from Stalin's future methods, a different level of cruelty. He lives in this cell for 1 whole year. He spends his time reading various works, like What is to be Done, the revolutionary's instruction manual penned by Lenin. The author of this pamphlet is Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, a Russian Marxist in exile who goes by the name of Lenin, a pseudonym alluding to the Lena, the great Siberian river. Lenin will soon become the leader of the revolution. 50 years later, his statue is the first to be pulled down by the Germans. In Minsk in July 1941, the main building housing the NKVD, the Soviet political police, is turned into SS headquarters. The SS have been ordered to exterminate the Jews. German propaganda expresses Nazi
Die
racism.
Gesichter dieser Untermenschen sind von Raubgier und Mordlust gezeichnet. In der Tat würdige Verbündete Churchills und seiner Plutokraten.
Thus begins the Holocaust by bullets. The massive genocide of the Jews. Famine in the ghettos. Death camps. The Germans continue to march through Russia. Their armored tanks break through the front, across 500 kilometers. Hitler now controls 20 million Soviets. The fate of the Red Army takes a tragic turn in 1941. It is poorly managed because Stalin executed thousands of officers in 1937. In mid-July 1941, Stalin establishes Order Number 270. It punishes the families of soldiers that surrender to the Germans. Hitler will let them die of starvation. One of these Soviet prisoners, Private Ivan Shulinsky, remembers. To stay alive, I would sing this tune from the land of hunger. If only I had wings, I would rise into the sky towards the clouds, where there is no pain and no punishment. The fate of these Soviet prisoners is a tragic one. Survivors are deported by Stalin because they have surrendered to the enemy. The Germans pursue their forward march. The Ukrainian farmers, victims of the Stalinian famine that caused 6 million deaths, welcome the invading Germans. They will be hanged when the Red Army returns. They are considered traitors and are filmed to show the example. The summer of 1941. the political commissars shoot anyone who retreats. In Moscow, the factories and their workers are evacuated. So are the ministries. Nurse Serafina Panasenko enlists. She explains, "My father was a communist. From the earliest age, he instilled in us the idea that the motherland was everything and must be defended." They will endure a horrifying fate if they are ever captured. But they fight for Stalin's Soviet Union. All the men from age 16 to 50 are immediately mobilized across the massive nation. 14 million soldiers. Their sacrifice and Stalin's appeal to patriotism has yielded results. The Germans are blocked on the road to Moscow in the center of the front. The battle for Smolensk delays the Blitzkrieg, Hitler's lightning war. The Russians have lost 1.5 million men. An additional 4 million are prisoners. German losses are heavy, an estimated 700,000 men, which is a source of worry to the Führer. Hitler declares, "Communism represents a terrible threat to our future. This war is a war of extermination. If we do not accept this, we may win, but the problem will resurface in 30 years. We are not waging war to spare the enemy." Omnipresent, Stalin directs the war against Hitler. He has appointed himself People's Commissar of Defense, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. However, like Hitler, he is an amateur strategist. Thankfully, Stalin has General Zhukov by his side. Stalin trusts this tank specialist. Zhukov is the only person who dares to tell him the truth. Zhukov predicts the Germans will now focus their efforts on Kiev. The city must be evacuated. Stalin explodes. "What is this insanity? How can we leave Kiev to the enemy?" But Zhukov's prediction is accurate. Stalin is wrong. Hitler decides to send his forces towards the south. The Germans start off towards the Ukraine. They surround the Soviet troops and take 600,000 prisoners. The Germans enter Kiev on September 26, 1941. In Ukraine, where the population is divided into anti-Soviets and resistance, the Nazis stir up hatred against Stalin. German propaganda shows the population in front of a prison. The people witness the evacuation of the victims of Stalinism. Stalin's political police have left the country after carrying out orders to empty the cells, meaning to execute the prisoners. 100,000 men are found with their hands tied behind their back. The Nazis assemble 34,000 Ukrainian Jews and assassinate them in the Baba Yar ravine near Kiev. A great Russian poet, Yevtushenko, writes Baba Yar in their memory. Here all things scream silently, and bearing my head, slowly I feel myself turning gray, and I myself am one massive soundless scream above the thousands and thousands buried here. I am each old man here shot dead. I am every child here shot dead. In Kiev, hatred is unleashed on the effigies of the absolute and merciless ruler, Stalin. Stalin, 1903. He still goes by the name Zhugashvili. He is 25. Between two jail stints, he joins the most extreme branch of the underground Socialist Party, the Bolsheviks. At the helm of this faction is Lenin, still in exile and as impassioned as ever. In Social Democrat meetings outside of Russia, Lenin confronts the Menshevik minority, more moderate than the Bolshevik majority. Lenin singles out Zhugashvili and supports his rise to the head of the Bolsheviks from the Caucasus. Lenin appreciates his Marxist sectarianism and, most of all, his financial contribution to the Bolshevik cause. This contribution comes from what is euphemistically referred to as expropriations, bank robberies. In Joseph Zhugashvili's eyes, these armed assaults are completely legitimate because his Marxist project is above the law. The end justifies the means. The most notorious of these holdups was recreated during the Soviet era. The attack on the Central Bank of Tiflis cash escort on June 12, 1907, organized by the future Stalin. The total spoils come to the equivalent of 6 million euros. But 5 men die and 16 are wounded during the operation. Many socialists condemn these criminal acts. Zhugashvili defends himself. We must continue to break the law until the revolution. To respect the law would mean to become normal. Only armed struggle can conquer Tsarism. In Baku, he begins to racketeer with Voroshilov, secretary of the Oil Workers' Union. Now he controls 50,000 men. He extorts the rich industrial powers by threatening to strike or to set fire to their wells. He regularly changes his appearance. He becomes one of Georgia's godfathers of crime. He deserves his alias, Stalin, Man of Steel. He is 30 and his sexual appetite is insatiable. His eyes are full of fire, according to one of his young conquests. His dangerous underground existence isn't conducive to family life. Nonetheless, in between 2 arrests, he meets a pretty seamstress, Ekaterina Svanidze. He is so smitten that for the first time, not only does he accept getting married, but he agrees to a church wedding. But 3 years later, she dies of tuberculosis at the age of 22. Remembering her, he says, "This woman knew how to melt my heart of stone." She gave him a son, Yakov, who Stalin even allows to be baptized. He cannot care for the child. Yakov is raised by his Georgian grandparents. Once he is in power, Stalin reclaims his son. Yakov is close to Stalin's bodyguard, Nikolai Vlasik. 1941. Yakov, an artillery lieutenant, is captured by the Germans. Capturing Stalin's son is an exceptional war trophy. When Stalin hears the news, he puts his own decree into effect and has Yakov's wife arrested and separated from his daughter. Yakov's interrogation by the Germans provides them with one essential piece of information. Yakov, who his father has never really loved, confides, "My father is afraid of the Russian nationalist movement. The creation of a Russian government hostile to Stalin could pave the way for a swift German victory." A report is immediately sent to Marshal von Bock, who passes it on to Hitler. This revelation could very well provide the Führer with the means to win the war by eliminating communism in the vast territory he already controls, by re-establishing the right to private ownership and freedom of religion. But Hitler doesn't do any of these things. To Hitler and his propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, the Russians are inferior beings, destined for slavery. Goebbels declares, "The Russians are not a people, but a conglomeration of animals." When Hitler receives his ally, Italian dictator Mussolini, he tells him, "This Russian soil is the most fertile in the world. Your Italians exhaust themselves working a gravelly soil. Here, you can find wide open spaces full of good soil. It will be the granary of the new Europe." The Germans had already invaded the Great Russian Plain 30 years earlier. (1914). Stalin doesn't take part in World War I. After a series of arrests and escapes, he ends up being deported to Siberia. Locked up for 3 years in an izba, he passes the time putting the world to rights with other exiled Marxists, such as Lev Kamenev, who will become one of the great men of the revolution, a man that Stalin will have executed 20 years later. March 12, 1917. Stalin, now a free man, arrives in St. Petersburg, which has been renamed Petrograd after the First Revolution of February 1917, when the Tsar was chased from power. Nicholas II admits, "I was born into unhappiness, and I have brought unhappiness to Russia." However, socialist Alexander Kerensky's provisional government wants to uphold Russia's commitments. This includes pursuing the war. He needs men. Stalin, summoned by the army, is declared unfit for service because of his atrophied arm. He returns to his Bolshevik friends, who have also come out of hiding. He becomes Kamenev's deputy, at the head of the daily newspaper Pravda, or The Truth, which backs the provisional government. Lenin returns from Switzerland on April 3, 1917. He rejects this government, which is propagating what he refers to as the imperialist war. Lenin exposes his program for revolution. For him, like for Stalin, still in the background, it is time to give all the power to the Soviets, to the worker and soldier councils forming in the cities. Lenin advocates merging all the banks and confiscating the big agricultural farms. On the front, the enlisted Russian farmers desert the army to participate in this wild redistribution of land. The summer of 1917. The Bolsheviks' influence spreads throughout the country. Thanks to Lenin's slogan, "I promise you peace, land, and bread." Other signs carry more threatening slogans. Down with the provisional government. Down with capitalist ministers. Leon Trotsky, 38, is a brilliant Jewish Marxist intellectual who has returned from exile in Paris and New York. Nothing about him is proletarian. Everything about him is despised by Stalin. Stalin, who is uncomfortable in public, envies his talent as an orator. Trotsky is skilled at rallying the crowds to the Bolshevik cause. So Kerensky, head of the provisional government, decides to get rid of the Bolsheviks. He launches a widespread police raid. 800 Bolsheviks are arrested, including Trotsky and Kamenev. Lenin escapes to Finland with the help of Stalin, who shaves off his famous goatee and disguises him as a farmer. Stalin stays behind. He becomes Lenin's messenger and gains in importance. Tension in the country is accentuated by the impending winter, making it an easy target for strikes and famine. After a 3-month absence, Lenin decides to return to Petrograd to kick off an insurrection. On the evening of November 7, 1917, the Bolsheviks take over all the capital's strategic points: the power station, the post office, the bridges. They free their prisoners. The Winter Palace, the Tsar's former residence, is the last refuge for Kerensky's provisional government. A battalion of young women are the only troops left to defend the palace. The garrison's starving soldiers have left in search of food. The cruiser Aurora, siding with the revolutionaries, fires a blank shot. This is the signal to launch the assault on the Winter Palace. The 140 heroic young women defend the palace to the bitter end. The Bolsheviks capture the members of the provisional government. Kerensky, their leader, manages to escape to America for a long exile. This coup d'etat is known as the October Revolution, in reference to the former Russian calendar. The actual date is November 7, 1917. The Bolsheviks are in power. Lenin forms his government. This Soviet reconstitution reproduces period footage, showing Lenin in his usual stance, with acute short-sightedness of the right eye. Lenin, wanting to eliminate bourgeois titles such as minister, coins the term People's Commissar. He offers Trotsky the position of Commissar of Interior Affairs, who declines. Is it worthwhile to put into our enemy's hands such an additional weapon as my Jewish origin? So Lenin offers him Foreign Affairs, which suits Trotsky perfectly. For the first time in history, a woman becomes a member of a government. Alexandra Kollontai, an aristocrat who has embraced Marxism. She will remain in office for 4 months. Lenin names Stalin Commissar of Nationalities. He is in charge of managing independence movements near the borders. The Georgian, who has gained his trust, wrote a brochure in 1913 entitled Marxism and the National Question. 20 years later, Stalin will order the execution of 12 of the 15 ministers of Lenin's 1917 government. But for the time being, Lenin holds the power. He is president of the Sovnarkom, the Council of the People's Commissar, and master of Petrograd, the capital of Russia. Petrograd, November 1917. After the Bolshevik coup d'etat, life returns to normal. There are no more clashes between militia in the streets. Writer Maxim Gorky wonders, what is going to happen now? I fear that much blood will be shed, much more than ever before. Lenin is seen in public with his mistress, a French militant named Ines Armand, and his wife, Nadezhda Krupskaya, a Bolshevik from the early days. He is pressured on 2 issues, peace with Germany and an upcoming political threat. Months ago, the provisional government had organized elections. Lenin decides to maintain the elections to legitimize his power. The first free elections in Russian history take place on November 25, 1917. Only 3 weeks after their coup d'etat, the elections are a crushing defeat for the Bolsheviks. They end up with 168 deputies against almost 400 for the socialist revolutionaries, who are more moderate and democratic. Lenin immediately dissolves the assembly. He establishes his dictatorship, which he christens Dictatorship of the Proletariat. He promises a society without classes. He suspends all liberties and rights, forbids the existence of political parties, and eliminates freedom of the press and the right to strike. Lenin designates all his opponents, left and right, as enemies of the people or counter-revolutionaries. To neutralize these enemies, he creates a new secret political police and names it the Cheka, using the Russian initials for Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution. Lenin declares, "We will launch ruthless mass terror. How can one make a revolution without firing squads?" The Cheka secret police is run by the Pole Felix Dzerzhinsky, a man physically diminished by the Tsar's prisons who has spent his life engaged in revolutionary activities. Dzerzhinsky has the persistence of an inquisitor. He states, "We have no use for justice. We are at war on the cruelest of fronts." This unique document takes us behind the scenes of the Cheka. The Chekists, recruited among the Bolshevist radicals and the worst psychopathic criminals, are filmed here after looting an apartment in what they refer to as the bourgeoisie's contribution. In 6 weeks, the Cheka, the secret police, carries out 50,000 assassinations. No law, no justice. The public prosecutor asserts, "We must go beyond executing the guilty. The execution of innocents will impress the masses far more." In this world of terror, Stalin seduces his 16-year-old secretary, Nadezhda Alliluyeva. He has known her since she was 4. Her parents, avid Bolsheviks, had hidden Lenin when the police were searching for him. Stalin had already had an affair with her mother, an advocate of free love. He marries Nadezhda, who bears him 2 children. They will both pursue unique destinies. She will prove to be a courageous woman, capable of facing the Red Tyrant at her own risk. March 3rd, 1918. The Russian and German soldiers emerge from the trenches and fraternize. The word on everyone's lips is international revolution. The banners call out, "Workers of the world, unite." Lenin and the Bolsheviks have just signed the peace treaty of Brest-Litovsk, a disaster for Russia, who loses a significant portion of land rich in wheat and steel. Petrograd is deemed too close to the German border. The Bolsheviks choose to return to the former capital, Moscow. Moscow, March 1918. Lenin poses in front of the famous Kremlin cannon. The Kremlin, the citadel that houses the tombs of the 47 Tsars. And today, the Tsar is Lenin, a Marxist, Lenin, the Russian dictator. His regime is supported by 3 pillars: the Bolshevik Party, the political police, and the Red Guards, who will evolve into the Red Army. But Lenin is in a precarious position. He is surrounded by forces hostile to Bolshevism. Throughout Russia, armies of White Guards are forming. Often constituted of former Tsarist soldiers, these men are prepared to fight ferociously against the Reds, who are undisciplined workers or farmers, often poorly armed and equipped. So Lenin appoints Trotsky, People's Commissar of Army and Navy Affairs, a military man at heart, Trotsky had brilliantly organized the Bolshevik coup of November 1917. All his energy will be required. Civil war is about to begin. It will last 4 years and claim 10 million lives. Both sides are equally barbaric. They take no prisoners. This Bolshevik soldier smiles in defiance at the whites about to kill him. There he is on the right, teasing them until the very last moment. In Russia, death has become an everyday companion. Vasily Petrovich Nikolaev, drafted into the Red Army at the age of 15, recalls. Our sign of recognition was the red star on our caps. Our comrades lay dead in the fields, their stars cut out of their caps. There were also white officers ripped apart by our bayonets. Their stripes were coming out of their bellies. We spared no one. Lenin and a handful of men had thrown an entire continent into chaos, so other governments hostile to the Bolsheviks begin to form, like the socialist revolutionaries in Samara, on the Volga. Disappointed and desperate, they put together a plot to assassinate Lenin. They use a woman, socialist revolutionary Fanny Kaplan. She shoots him in the shoulder and the lung. Fanny Kaplan later states, "I fired at Lenin because I consider him to be a traitor to socialism. His very existence discredits socialism." Regaining consciousness, Lenin refuses to be hospitalized, where he believes he will be at risk. He has himself transported to the Kremlin, where the doctors are unable to operate. Lenin survives, with 2 bullets in his body. Fanny Kaplan is tortured and executed without a trial 3 days later. In retaliation, the Cheka executes 1,300 unlucky souls declared hostages of the bourgeoisie. The Bolshevik government decree of August 30th, 1918 officializes the Red Terror. It stipulates the class enemies must be isolated in concentration camps. All people are to be executed by firing squad who are connected with the White Guard organizations, conspiracies, and mutinies. Like the horsemen of the apocalypse, the Bolsheviks wreak death and destruction in order to stay in power. They pursue this course of action for the next 20 years until the Germans show up at the gates of Moscow. 1941, early November, German bombers attack the Soviet capital. The Wehrmacht's tanks are 70 kilometers from the Kremlin. Hitler declares, Russia is finished. In Moscow, Stalin decides to stop authorizing evacuations and to shoot all those suspected of wanting to leave the city. On November 6th, 1941, safe inside the Moscow subway, Stalin delivers a great speech in front of his government and Communist Party leaders. Stalin quotes Hitler, directing the Führer's words at the men and women listening to him. They have survived 2 decades of terror. Stalin warns them that the worst is yet to come.
Говорит Гитлер, управлять им можно только с помощью силы. В обращении с ним позволительны любые методы. Когда этого требует политика, надо лгать, предавать и даже убивать. Я освобождаю человека от унижающей химеры, которая называется совесть.
Stalin has always lied, betrayed, and killed. In his utopic world, he has forged a new society and a new man. The Red Man. Red like the revolution. Blood red.